I think we've got the green light to start the program here. So just first things first, I really appreciate all you guys coming out here for the talk tonight. A little background on myself. I'm the education assistant out at the Historical Museum at Fort Missoula. Been here for almost 2 years now. Before that, I was on a little adventure with the Park Service. And a proud graduate of the University of Montana. So good to see some Grizz fans here, and a former professor of mine who ironically just reminded me that I wrote a paper about fishing in one of his history classes. So on that note, a little background on this program. This is the 2025 updated version of the first historical program I ever did. So as a kid from Great Falls, Montana, you are surrounded by a couple things. A whole lot of prairie, mountains way off in the distance, the Missouri River, and Lewis and Clark. Lots and lots of Lewis and Clark. And I volunteered a lot at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, and as someone who loves history, as someone who loves fishing, I was naturally pretty drawn to it. And so I started looking into the history of it. What was fishing like 200 years ago? And this is sort of the culmination of that seed planted all those years ago. So before I get rolling into this and we start this little fishing trip of ours, and maybe hear a fishing tale or two, quick show of hands. How many of you folks love going fishing? I better be seeing all them hands. Yeah. Anybody who prefers hunting over here? Oh, good, good. Oh, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. So all jokes aside, I think we've got a lot of river miles to cover. So without further ado, let's learn a little fishing with Lewis and Clark. So to start, we got to go back to not quite the very beginning, but pretty darn close. So I don't think it's controversial to say that people have loved to go fishing for a very, very long time. The original image I was using for this was a Roman mosaic, but on closer examination, let's just say that their fishing rods were out loud and proud for everyone to see, and I didn't think that was appropriate. But fishing jokes aside, meet Isaac Walton. And if you've spent any time in fly fishing country or have ever wet a fly in your life, you probably know this man's name. He's not exactly the father of fishing, but he's pretty darn close if you have to put a name and a face to it. So what he's really known for is his book published in the 1600s, The Complete Angler, or The Contemplative Man's Recreation. Because fishing is more than just food. It is something that provides enjoyment, peace, and just all sorts of good feelings to people around the globe even today. And it's amazing that Walton, 400 years ago, was already aware of fishing being more than just dinner. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of the philosophy, a lot of what he talks about as sportsmanship and the art of fishing is something that we still hold true today. So it's not just philosophy, it's the tackle itself. I like to say that fishing doesn't really change, the toys just get a little newer, the materials get a little better. Because any of you fly fishermen in the room? Anybody here fly fishermen? Yeah. Looking up at our screen and some of the flies that we see there, do any of those sound familiar? Yeah, because I know green drakes are still used. There's duns. There, so many of these flies that are still being used today, though they've changed a little bit, they've been improved, they largely are still following patterns that have been around for hundreds of years at this point. So beyond fly fishing, the tackle in general, by the time Lewis and Clark are heading out in 1800, by the time they're out and about, fishing tackle is really starting for the first time to look like modern tackle. We're getting the first composite rods that are jointed. Before this, if you look at this image right here, that is just one solid stick with a line tied to the end. Simple, but effective. Of course, part of the reason why I don't have a fishing rod with me today is because, for lack of a better explanation, that's not going to fit in my car. They are hard to travel with, they are cumbersome, and so a lot of those early fishing rods pretty quickly get replaced with joints once they figure out the technology. The jointed rod that you see up on the top right, that is an original rod dated pre-1840. They started to put these little brass joints that they could take apart the rods and actually travel with them. Starting around 1800, you are also starting to see the earliest bamboo fishing rods as well. Increased trade with China, with East Asia in general, allows a lot more improved fishing materials to make their way towards Great Britain and the Americas. So beyond just the rods, you're also starting to see the first fishing reels. People are going out to watch and clockmakers to buy brass fishing winches. And the early ones, like you see on the screen here, they have a little spike foot that goes into a hole that you cut into the rod, and then you tighten it with the little screw on the end. That's all fine and dandy, but you're kind of affecting the structural integrity of your rod. By 1800, you see the earliest clamp foots that can insert into little clamps on your rod. And the one I've got in my hand right now is an original. I've got a bunch of fishing tackle up here. So at the end of the program, everybody please come on up, check some stuff out. It's pretty darn cool, but looks a little small, but it gets the job done. This one is a little confession after Lewis and Clark, but only by about 20 years. So they're pretty simple, they're single gear, they're more meant to just hold enough line on than anything else. You're not going to be fighting much of a big fish with a little advantage with this. So beyond that, you also are starting to see a lot of advancements in artificial lures and tackle. What you see on the screen there, what does that look like today, fishermen? You're looking at a really kind of early example of a spoon, or in some cases, crankbaits. So that one is made out of tin and glass. I've seen a couple other ones that would look right at home in a tackle box today. But that one was just kind of the most fun. You can see the twisted tail of tin and how it would spin through the water a little bit, kind of wobble. So I find it interesting that, you know, even 200 years ago, the origin point and kind of the makings of our modern fishing tackle, you can start to see it really come out at the time of Lewis and Clark. So I've talked a lot about angling. I've talked about all this fancy tackle. I don't have a lot of that up here, because the other half of that reason is not only is it expensive and hard to find and hard to transport oftentimes, it isn't what Lewis and Clark took. So most of the fishing that they were doing was what you would have called back then coarse fishing. And basically, long story short, angling, consider it fly fishing; coarse fishing, consider it bait fishing. So this is one of my favorite depictions of a coarse fisherman from just before Lewis and Clark. This is in the 1780s. It's a sailor hanging onto a cannon for dear life and just holding a line out, hoping that he's not going to catch something so big it's going to drag him into the briny blue. So beyond that, it's something kind of interesting. Who here has heard of hand lines? Yeah. So this is fishing without a pole with just a length of line and either a float or a weight at the end. I have actually fished with this. Believe it or not, I've caught something with this. And it's an otherworldly experience. For lack of a better description, you feel the heartbeat of the river when you have this in your hands. And that was still one of the most special fishing trips of my life. I caught catfish right below Pompey's Pillar with this exact thing. So kind of fun to be able to say I've done that. But to use this, simply put, you go upstream a little bit from where you want to throw in. Usually just find a nice hole on the side of the river. Get out the requisite length of line you need to toss out and then just let it unwind. So I would show you more, but I don't want to hook your nice carpet, Missoula Public Library. So, hand lining. It's deceptively simple, but it takes some practice to get used to. So when you're a young Army captain being tasked by the President of the United States with exploring the western lands of this continent, you're going to be going over a lot of river miles. Odds are you're going to do some fishing, yeah? And so when Lewis is preparing for the expedition, he buys a bunch of fishing tackle, but it's almost all coarse fishing gear. He buys a bunch of hooks, all sorts of assorted lines, ranging from the coarsest hemp up to the finest in silk and gut. Believe it or not, they were making fishing line out of silk and intestines, gut. They also were making it out of horsehair. A lot of fly lines were horsehair. Take a lot of work to make a horsehair fishing line, I'll tell you that. But from this assorted mess of coarse fishing gear, I forgot perhaps the most important piece of fishing gear in any angler's arsenal. He bought a whiskey flask, too. So just as a side tangent on the hooks, if you guys look in that little black box, you are looking at a fishing kit owned by George Washington himself. The thing about hooks at the end, they are either blind or spade end. So the blind hooks, they don't have an eye at all. You have to be really creative with your knots when you tie them, or else they'll just slip out. The spade end works a little bit more like a modern hook. You still got to tie it a little differently, but that spade end will prevent your line from slipping off. And I've got some spade end hooks up here, so again, please come up and check out some cool fishing gear when this is all said and done. So we've got our fishing gear, we're ready to roll. Let's see what they find. So the earliest get-go of fishing on the expedition is almost at the very start. They're on the Ohio River, and when they get to the mouth of it, they catch a blue catfish. Anybody know what those things are like? They're big. This right here is the current Tennessee state record, caught just a couple years ago. It weighed in at 120 pounds. What if I told you that Lewis and Clark beat that record? By 8 pounds, but they beat it with this. 128 pounds on a hand line. I can't imagine. But the thing about it is that winter, they don't have a lot of time to prepare and, well, not a lot of time to fish. They're preparing for an expedition to go up the Missouri River. And the summer of 1804 is really when fishing is going to kick off. And so as they're going up the Missouri River, as a lot of people called it at the time, they are already meeting some interesting new fish that they've never met. Of course, channel catfish. Clark describes it as having a tail like a dolphin. Bet you didn't know that Clark was aware of dolphins. Kind of a fun little side tangent. These guys can get decent size, but they're nowhere near as big as a blue catfish. And for most of the Missouri River journey, the channel cat is going to be the primary fish they're encountering and eating a lot of. When they get up into Nebraska, they try out a very interesting piece of fishing gear. And if you look at this fella, you know, right there with his goofy sideburns and things like that, definitely know he never did anything cool in his life. That's me. That is a very bad example of a brush drag. It was the first one I ever made. And if I had a chance to do it over again, it would look way better than that. I would not be catching fish with a brush drag like that. But the concept is pretty simple. You basically make a frame out of willows, and then you tie your uprights on it and then weave in little cross pieces. And you're effectively making like a wooden net almost. And you can make enough of these little frame pieces to connect together and stretch across the length of a creek or river. How you use a brush drag is simply put, you go against the current, pushing it before you. You have a couple guys beating the water upstream, forcing the fish down towards the brush drag. And you'll have some guys in the middle with little fish gigs and spears, you know, stabbing away and throwing whatever you get onto the bank. So using a brush drag, which for the record, these are all theoretical. Please do not ever use any of these in the real world, lest FWP get mad at me. These ones right here, they were catching on a low end 400 fish. On the high end, over 800. So it is a really time-effective way. You can put one of these together in a couple hours. It's just a really good way to catch a lot of fish really quickly. And they're going to use brush drags a couple times. This method pops up throughout the journey. Further down below on, you know, the lower Missouri, but then they'll use it again in Montana, near Dillon, as well as over on the Idaho side. So kind of an interesting piece of fishing technology. You can also use it as a sunshade, by the way. So multi-purpose. So who the heck is doing the fishing on this expedition? Any guesses? Little side note about me, guys. I love interaction with the audience in my programs, so don't be shy. But a couple people mentioned as fishing on this expedition are, of course, well, Lewis and Clark, but also Sacagawea. York is mentioned as going fishing. This is something that a lot of people on this expedition did, not just to feed themselves, but because they simply like to fish. Oop. Tech support. So, a couple things about the fishing on here. There is one guy above all who is mentioned as the principal fisherman, and he's somebody that I've had an interesting walk through history with. And wait, that can't be right. Ah, yes, Silas Goodrich. So he is an interesting character on the Lewis and Clark expedition. He's not somebody we know much about. In fact, about the only thing we know about him is that he liked fishing. So much so that Lewis calls him our principal fisherman, or describes him as remarkably fond of fishing. He's born in Massachusetts sometime in the 1770s. The picture you see behind you with this, that is actually a lake just down the road from where he grew up. It is one of Western Massachusetts' most popular fishing spots even today. So I can only imagine that, like a lot of people, this guy grew up loving fishing. So we're out in the plains, folks. We've got 40, 50 million buffalo running around. Do you really think that the locals are spending much time out there getting their pants wet trying to get those little channel cats when you can just, and you have a buffalo that's going to feed you for days? So that's the thing. With the buffalo, there's this idea that the Great Plains, they're not fishing people. And for the most part, that's kind of true. There's not a lot of fishing cultures out there. But it's not to say that there's none. When the expedition gets up to modern-day North Dakota, they run into the Mandan and Hidatsas. And the Earth Lodge peoples of the Middle Missouri are really unique because they have a well-developed fishing culture that doesn't get talked about that much. So older men whose days of hunting are starting to be a little further in the rearview mirror than they'd like, they are the ones primarily responsible for fishing in the Earth Lodge cultures. And this is a wonderful image of a Hidatsa man with a fish basket going out for catfish around the turn of the 20th century. And the fish basket that you see right there is a wonderful piece of fishing technology because you're not just going to find it in indigenous cultures. You're going to find this around the world. The Welsh make very similar fish baskets. Germans make very similar fish baskets. You can find similar ones in China. It does not matter where it is. The technology is remarkably consistent. Picture basically like a cone-shaped basket with however many rings you need around to provide structural integrity, depending on the size of the basket. And inside you would place another smaller cone going the same direction. Basically, it's large enough for fish to go in, but they can't turn around and swim out. Too hard, and then basically the sticks facing towards them will convince them that maybe I just need to stay in the basket where it's safe. This will come up again in conjunction with something called a weir, but it's very important to note that it doesn't matter where you're at, it doesn't matter what fish you're fishing for, or who you are doing the fishing. The technology is remarkably consistent. So beyond the Earth Lodge villages, this is really the beginning of unknown fisheries. And this is really the part of the expedition where fishing really gets famous, or it's the most known section of it. And when they are at the mouth of the Marias River, Goodrich is doing a lot of fishing. This is where you start seeing him pop up by name, and he's mentioned as doing a ton of fishing. But in the words of John Ordway, who was a friend of Goodrich's, compatriot on the expedition, he says, "As we have a great plenty of meat, we do not trouble ourselves for to catch fish." That's a mouthful. So beyond the Marias here, they encounter two new fish, sauger and goldeye. And the method that they were using to fish for these is kind of interesting. This is what is called a seine net. And simply put, it's cast out into the river and drawn back towards you. Usually there's some weights on the bottom that keep it towards the floor of the river, and then you have some floats on top that keep it going. It's another great way, just like the brush drag, to catch a lot of fish really quickly. And this is one of the few times the seine net gets mentioned on the expedition. So kind of an interesting bit. But Great Falls, a place near and dear to my heart, and one of the shining moments for fishing on the expedition. So they have been told by the Hidatsas that you're going to come to this great waterfall, and that's how you're going to know you're on the real Missouri. And so all the way up since they've passed the Milk River, they are looking for this dang waterfall. And they hit the Marias, they weren't expecting it, and they've got a conundrum. Where the heck is this waterfall? Which river is the real Missouri? They have decided to try the left fork. They're going to keep going up, and Lewis is going to go out ahead looking for the waterfall. and with him goes Goodrich. And they're out on the morning of June 13th. Lewis sends the other 3 men in the party to go off to the sides and hunt. Goodrich isn't much of a hunter. He's sticking with Lewis. And the 2 of them begin walking and walking towards the southwest, following parallel with the river column until they start seeing what looks like smoke coming up out. They rush forward, and wouldn't you know it, there it is, the Great Falls of the Missouri. We found the right river. And while Lewis pens a beautiful description of the waterfalls and complains about his artistic inabilities, what do you think Goodrich is doing? Yeah, he's down trying to see what he can pull out of the river right there. That is a great fishing spot. And wouldn't you know it, by the time Lewis is done, he comes down and Goodrich has half a dozen of these laying on the bank. And Lewis says they resemble our mountain and speckled trout in shape and form, but notes a peculiar red mark on the underside of the jaw. What fish is this? Cutthroat trout, Montana's state fish, discovered by Silas Goodrich, not Lewis and Clark, on June 13th of 1805. Now, the scientific name of the cutthroat trout is Oncorhynchus clarkii-lewisi. I hope by the end of this program you will agree with me that it needs to be changed to Oncorhynchus Silas Goodrichi. So, the falls are a natural divide on the Missouri River. Below it, it's a warm water fishery. This is the land of catfish, of the goldeye, the sauger. Above, the river becomes clear. This is a mountain stream. This is blue water fly country that thousands of people pay good money to fish to this day. But there's only one problem. They've only brought coarse fishing gear. All through July and August of 1805, as they're passing through this amazing fly fishing country, Clark is complaining in his journal that the fish won't bite at any bait we give them. They're literally standing on rocks, looking over the river at fish right below them, and they won't do anything. How many fishermen have ever had that happen? Yeah, how does that feel? Yeah. Interesting to note how our feelings towards fish have not changed that much, for good and bad. But as they're going upriver, they are not only passing through a changing river ecosystem, they're passing into another world. Below this point, it's people of the bison. As you enter the mountains, you start to see more fish culture come through. These are plateau peoples who, yeah, they'll hunt buffalo, but a lot of their time is spent looking for fish. And they'll go out and fish locally for bull trout and things like that and cutthroats. But the real king in the West is the salmon. And once they cross the Continental Divide into the Columbia watershed, they are really in salmon's country. And just to illustrate how important these fish were to people, salmon was to the western tribes what the buffalo was east of the mountains. One Yakima chief has this quote that just really hits me, where he says, "My blood is from the fish, my strength is from the fish." This is life itself swimming up the river every year to give life to your people. And there's not enough, I can stress, just how important these fish were. And so they meet the Shoshones in southwest Montana. They cross over the Columbia Divide. And Lewis says that he has some dried salmon, and that's what convinced him he had finally made it over into the Columbia system. But it is not all fun and games in salmon's country. When salmon isn't there, it can be some mighty lean times. And just a quick aside here, I told you the fish basket would come into play. This is a remarkable image taken just 50 years after Lewis and Clark left the area. This is of a Kootenai village up on the Tobacco Plains by Eureka. And what did I tell you? The fish baskets are not that different. It's a little longer than the Hidatsa basket, but it looks pretty much the same otherwise. So it's pretty incredible that we have an image like this. This is as close as we are going to get to seeing Lewis and Clark stuff. And so, like I said, it's lean times when the salmon's not there. And as they're going over the Bitterroot Mountains over the Nez Perce Trail, Lolo Trail to a lot of people, they are coming down into a divide led by a Shoshone man they call Old Toby. And people will claim Toby was lost. I don't think he was lost. He was following what was probably a Salish fishing trail to a salmon fishing spot. They're right on the edge of when you can get fall Chinook, so I think he was just trying to find a spot where they could possibly get some fish. Because they talk about finding some weirs down in there, and this is what a weir looks like when it's not in use. Similar to the brush drag, it's pretty simple to use. You basically build a little stick fence through the river with little openings for you to put your baskets. When you want to fish, you put your baskets in. When you don't want to fish, you take them out, open up the gates, and fish can go free. Basically what happens is the fish will come up against that barrier, look for the opening, and swim right into the basket. These were pretty smart fishermen. They are not doing this for sport. This is for food. This is to survive. But it's really effective. So if you guys are ever lost in the wilderness, this might be your saving grace. Forgive me, FWP. But they stumble out of the Bitterroot Mountains more alive, well, more dead than alive, and they find the Nez Perce, or moreover, the Nez Perce find them. And these are people that, again, they live seasonally on the salmon and the buffalo. They're really a great example of that mixed plateau culture, but they decide to help the expedition, and they feed them salmon and camas. And salmon in this part of the world, it's quite fun. This looks so tasty, doesn't it? Roasted up against the fire, a little smoke getting in there. Wonderful. A lot of times the tribes, after they had dried the fish, they would pound it into almost like, how do I put this? You guys ever had that like powdery jerky stuff? Yeah. If you haven't, it's hard to describe. But they'll pound it into kind of these loose little chunks and powdery bits, mix it with fat and berries, and basically it's like pemmican. Have you ever heard of pemmican? Yeah, it's the same idea, but this is fishican, or salmican. I don't know. And it's very nutritious. It'll fill you up. You can eat it as is. You can put it in a soup, stew, whatever you want to do with it. It is calories and life, regardless. There's only a couple problems. There's a lot of reasons what might cause this, but they get ungodly sick off of their diet of salmon and camas. It's 1805. There's no food safety. Refrigeration is not a thing. God only knows how food safe some of that might have been. No fault of the people making it. They've also been starving for 2 weeks at this point. I think any food would probably upset their systems. But they're also eating camas. And to give you an idea for anyone who has never tried camas before, it's actually quite tasty. Kind of tastes like dates or fruit leather, if you've ever had that. But it has a interesting side effect. In the words of one Nicholas Point, who was a Jesuit priest out in this area in the 1840s, he says that it is a palatable food, but it is accompanied by certain sounds and the smells that go with them. Or to put it in William Clark's terms, our meal filled us so full of wind, we were scarce able to breathe all night. Anybody seen Blazing Saddles? The bean scene? This was literally them. And because of this bad experience with salmon and camas, these guys want some red meat. And they're going to look to a very interesting source to get it. I very purposefully chose the cutest puppy picture I could. Believe it or not, 193 dogs were eaten on the Lewis and Clark expedition. Somebody took the time to count that. Heck of a master's thesis, right, Leif? But yes, they turned to eating dog to get down the Columbia. And so filled with their diet of dog, salmon, and rootin' tootin' camas bread, they head down the Columbia. And they are in such a rush to get through this part of the world, they're taking chances that they normally wouldn't take. And one of those is when they come to this place. Say hello to one of the single greatest fishing sites in the world. This is Celilo. This is the Great Falls of the Columbia, or the Dalles for you folks today. And this is a spot where the Columbia goes from about 1.5 miles wide to 75 feet in some places. Think of it this way. You have millions of salmon swimming upriver every year. And every single one of those fish that wants to spawn upstream in any of those rivers above the Dalles has to pass through that narrow little channel. So if you're a fisherman, this is the best place in the world to fish. And it's very famous for dip nets. It's one of the indigenous techniques that were being used out there. Simply put, you have a platform. These platforms were passed down through families through the generations. And it's a place where simply you dip in and you take out the fish you need once they are crammed into those narrow channels. And we're talking about being able to feed your family for a whole year off of one single fishing spot. This is incredible. There is a 15,000-year archaeological record of fishing at Celilo, or at least there was. Foreshadowing. And they pass right through it. Sometimes in the Columbia, I wish they were not in such a hurry. But they shoot on down to the coast, and this is where fish get funky, both literally and figuratively. They are in a totally different world from what they are used to. They are back on a coast with anadromous fish. And some of the ones that they're really experiencing at the time they're there, there's a run of white sturgeon that would come through. And as you well know, sturgeon is my favorite fish in the world. I don't care what variety, they are amazing. And this is the biggest fish that they encounter on the journey. They talk about seeing a canoe of Chinooks coming past them with a sturgeon in the canoe as big as the boat. Like, that's insane. These things can get over 20 feet long and weigh in the thousands of pounds. And it's kind of interesting, one of the fishing methods that they use to catch them, the tribes out there. They would have had this really long spear with a harpoon point on the end and a line attached to the point. You would basically wait in the boat until you have a feather tied to it that's down there. A sturgeon will hit that. You basically hold it right about where you think they're going to be in the water column, and it's not going to be a rock. But if that feather floats up, you know there's a sturgeon down there, and well, you got 20 feet to try, so might as well jam down and see what you get. And if you get a sturgeon, oh boy, hang on for dear life, because you are in for quite a fight. It's basically just like a hand line, but a very angry, stabbed sturgeon on the end of it. As someone who has fished for the tiny sturgeon with hook and line, I don't want to imagine a big one that's really mad at me. They fight. But in addition to the sturgeon, the other one that I really want to talk about are these little guys right here. Does anyone know what those are? Yeah, they're candlefish. Why are they called candlefish, though? It's because when they're dried, they are so oily, you can light them on fire. They'll burn like a candle. So they're eulicon is the technical term for them. Candlefish is another nickname for them, but I prefer to call them by another nickname. They're called hooligans up in British Columbia and Alaska. But really, really wonderful. They talk about them tasting a lot like anchovies. As someone who thinks the anchovy is a very underappreciated culinary piece in your arsenal, I think I would have loved to have some hooligans with Lewis and Clark. But we're talking about guys who are eating a diet of poor elk meat, really, really lean. They're boiling seawater to get salt for it. So for them, tasting this rich, oily, anchovy-like fish, that's a real treat. At the time, who's heard of the blue whale that Lewis and Clark find? Yeah? At the time, believe it or not, they considered whales to be fish, a lot of people. So I guess it's only appropriate that I talk about the whale, too. Same thing as the hooligans here. They are really interested in the whale's blubber because, again, when you're eating a very lean diet that's really not that great anyways, any source of fat and flavor that you can get, it's extra nutrients and calories that are going to keep you alive. And I really think it was just a great treat for them. Whale oil is also really valuable for lighting lamps. So thank lamps and people needing a little extra seafoody fat in their diet for killing off the whales. But 1806, we've gone through 1805. This is the big year for fishing. 1806 is a little different. And it's kind of where things start going downhill. And ironically, they are following salmon back home as they're going up the Columbia. And this is another wonderful illustration. I love doing visuals that are as close to the real stuff as you're going to get. This is a painting done by Paul Kane, a Canadian artist who came through the Northwest about 40 years after Lewis and Clark, of fisher folk down at Kettle Falls. So not something that Lewis and Clark saw, but it's as close as we're going to get because you don't have pictures at this time of the fishing at Celilo. But pretty interesting. So they're following the Columbia up. They're still trading away all their fishing gear at this point to buy transportation and food to get home. Oftentimes, Goodrich pops up in the journals going to native villages to trade away fishing tackle. I don't want to imagine how much that probably was not to his liking. But they get back to the Nez Perce and they're trapped, they're stuck. There's still snow in the Bitterroots and, oh no, the spring run of Chinook is still not here. So it's back to that fish or famine thing that I was talking about earlier. If the salmon's not there, it's hungry times. And they are just waiting and hoping for this spring run to arrive. And they get a little creative at this point. They've traded away most of their fishing gear, and they're starting to get a little desperate for when they might actually want to go fishing. Should have thought about that earlier before you traded it away, guys. But they're up there in those rivers near Kuskia, Idaho. And, well, how do I put this? One man decides that he is going to make his own fish spear by using his U.S. Army provided bayonet. That ought to work, right? Well, another man decides that he has no interest in getting his pants wet or ruining U.S. Army property, and so he decides he's going to use his musket to shoot the fish, should he see one. So in this duel of fishermen, cue the dueling fishermen, little banjos and da-da-da-da-da kind of thing, who do you think wins, the bayonet or the musket? Any guesses? Who's team musket? Anybody? Who's team bayonet? I hate to say this. Team musket, raise your hand again. Round of applause for team musket, because how do I put this? Musket 2, bayonet 0. Somehow, some way, this hapless private managed to shoot fish, not in a barrel, but in a creek in Idaho. So, again, don't be getting no ideas. I don't want Idaho Fish and Game after me either. And finally, some fish do arrive. And when they bring those shot fish back to camp, Lewis is mortified to find out that they are not Chinook, but steelhead. He's mortified at steelhead. If any of you who have ever done spring steelhead in Idaho, it's a treat. But it just shows you their concerns were a little different than ours back 200 years ago. But they're crossing over the Lolo Trail back into Montana, and ironically, they are retracing a fishing legend. So, why aren't there salmon in the Bitterroot River? Or the Clark Fork? Or the Flathead, for that matter? We're part of the Columbia system, right? Yeah, we deserve some salmon too, but we don't have any. And it all goes back to a story which I can't tell the whole thing, as it's not wintertime, but long story short, Coyote, a figure in Salish legend, wants to bring back salmon to the Bitterroot and Clark Fork system. And he is going over the Lolo Trail. He picks some up in the Clearwater, and he's, hiking back. And he gets up to Lolo Pass, and he is plumb tuckered out. And so he rests. He sets down the salmon, take a little breather. And wouldn't you know it, the next thing he knows, that slippery little bugger is heading right back down the mountainside for Idaho. And thus, we don't have salmon. Dang it, Coyote. You had one job. But this is a delightful little sculpture down near Walla Walla that kind of illustrates the tale of Coyote and the salmon. So, kind of find it funny that Lewis and Clark kind of did that trip the same way. Side tangent, when they're at Traveler's Rest, part of the reason why they decided to go over the Lolo Trail is because there were no salmon in the Bitterroot River. Lewis figured there has to be a massive waterfall somewhere down this river that's so big they can't get through. And knowing their experience back at Great Falls with a 20-mile portage, they decide not to go down the Clark Fork. So coming back through western Montana, they are passing both parties through a very interesting connection with one of Montana's most famous fishing stories. They split up at Traveler's Rest, Clark's group going back up the Bitterroot Valley, through the Big Hole, and over towards the Three Forks, and eventually Bozeman, and down across to Livingston. Great fly fishing country, and a lot of it was where they shot the famous movie A River Runs Through It. Lewis, on the other hand, he comes right here through Missoula, up the Blackfoot River, through where the novel is actually set, and where they should have actually filmed the movie, if you ask me. And here's the crazy thing. None of them did any fishing in either spot whatsoever. So eat your heart out, Brad Pitt. But the last fishing with Lewis and Clark happens in Montana for the most part. There is one final little fishing event that they have further down on the lower Missouri, but Montana is the last place where both parties are doing any fishing. Lewis records he's heading up the Marias River looking for the northernmost extent of the Louisiana Purchase. He is in Blackfoot territory and not anxious to meet them. And he is kind of hunkered down at this northern bend of Cutbank Creek, hoping to God that the Blackfeet don't show up, and hoping that the clouds and the rain will dissipate long enough for him to figure out where he's at with his sextant. And he records that the only thing they had to eat at that camp on one of their last days there was some root mush and one measly little trout. Clark, on the other hand, he's down on the Yellowstone River. He records catching some catfish not far from where Miles City is today. And that kind of ends the fishing story for Lewis and Clark. But what about Goodrich? What about him? What happens to our fine fisherman? Well, he's with Lewis's party. So you'd think that, well, we got the fishermen, we'll be doing some fishing. No. There's a reason for that. Part of the reason why he's with Lewis's party is he's going to be left at Great Falls. Probably to do a little fishing there to feed the guys preparing for the portage, but also because he's suffering from syphilis. Yeah, so Traveler's Rest, by the way, we found that location largely because of the mercury that they found in the latrine. There were two guys using mercury at Traveler's Rest, Hugh McNeil and Silas Goodrich. So, thanks Silas and his dalliances for helping us find that beautiful little historic site right in our backyard. See, I told you he'd be important, right? Well, after the expedition, this is where things get interesting for me. Like I said, I've had an interesting walk through history with Silas Goodrich. So in Great Falls at the Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, we had a little living history group where we'd dress up in the funny old clothes and we'd pretend to be Lewis and Clark for the weekend. And everybody in the group was assigned an individual member of the expedition based off of physical characteristics and background, what we like to do. So we tried to match these guys as best we could with the knowledge that we had. And I got Silas Goodrich. And imagine my disappointment when I found out we literally knew basically nothing about him other than he liked to fish. And so I've kind of made it a personal quest of mine to figure out who was this guy really and what happened to him. And it's taken me almost a decade to do it, but I think I finally found him. After the expedition, he returns to the Northeast, to Massachusetts. He gets married, settles on land in New York, not far from the Erie Canal, ends up as an apple farmer, of all things, right next to a little brook. Dies in 1845 as probably one of the last surviving Lewis and Clark expedition members. In his will, he's very concerned about his maps and his papers and books. So this was a guy who had some interest in that sort of thing. But I find it interesting that today there's a fish hatchery about 1.5 miles down the road from where his farm used to be. And though Silas gets his happy ending, it's a different story for our rivers and our fish. This is the Great Falls today for most of the year. You won't see it roar and come to life unless it's May or June. The fishing spot that Goodrich was at, the rock pile that Lewis was sitting on, they're still there, but they are changed irreparably. At least it seems that way right now. But the river divide has shifted. You won't catch a cutthroat trout in that location anymore. You haven't been able to for years. The effects of agriculture, of large-scale ranching, the runoff that has filtered into the Missouri above that point has rendered it into a warm water fishery without any warm water fish. So growing up in Great Falls, it was always a case of you had to drive 45 minutes to go fishing a lot of the times because the fishing was just so bad in the area because the fish that were supposed to be there aren't there anymore. The river divide shifted 40, 50 miles by this point. In addition to that, probably the worst hit of our rivers is the Columbia. This is Celilo in the 1950s. They were still dip netting into, living memory for a lot of people. Who here was born before the 1950s? Anybody? Yeah. This was going on within your lifetime. And like a lot of things on the Columbia, 15,000 years of human history, fishing was destroyed in a matter of hours. But it's not to say that there haven't been some good positive developments either. For as much as we've hurt our fish, we have a remarkable ability to help them too. And in the case of salmon, recovery efforts have been really building in the last couple decades. And while we probably won't ever see those kind of runs again in our lifetime, hope is there that if we do the right things, we might see something. And I like to think that so long as there's fish in our rivers and people who care about them and want to fish for them, there's hope. And for me, that hope is summed up in the hope that everyone gets to enjoy Montana's rivers and our fish in the West the same way that Silas Goodrich, Lewis and Clark, Sacagawea, and the expedition did, and the same way that I got to do as a kid. So with that, we'll free it up for some questions here, and yeah.
If you have questions, raise your hand and I'll bring you the microphone. Any questions?
Tough crowd.
Oh, excuse me.
What was that?
Could you tell me what camas?
Oh, camas. It's a delightful native plant. It has a beautiful blue flower. The other half of Father Point's description of camas talks about how he would be riding with the Salish through these meadows in western Montana, and he would see what he thought was a lake out in front of him, and it just turned out to be these vast meadows of camas. So if you go up to Lolo Pass in June, you will still see these lakes of camas that go out there. But they have a bulb that looks quite a bit like a tulip bulb. And basically what they do is you would harvest the camas bulb and you'd roast it over a period of days to render it more edible. And once it does, it gets on this beautiful, almost like a caramelized onion color, with a texture a lot like dates, and it tastes a lot like them too. I've had camas before made by some wonderful Nez Perce aunties in Lapwai, Idaho, and I could eat that stuff. It's pretty good. So yeah, June, go out to Lolo Pass, look around for it. There used to be a lot of camas in this area, but it's starting to go away, just like the fish, unfortunately. So pause up, by the way. That place, I won't use any adjectives, but that place is built atop a large camas ground historically. So.
How do you spell that?
C-A-M-A-S.
Thank you.
Camas. Do not use the Lewis and Clark journals to figure out the spelling, because they'll give you 15 ways to do it.
Did they list how big the salmon were when they were in that area?
Oh, so the problem with it is that they had a tough time judging size on that because, well, we're dealing with filleted out fish, and a lot of times the way they were getting it, it was already pounded into that fish pemmican anyways. They were also in so much of a rush that they start to kind of falter a little bit on it. I know they list it somewhere, but I don't have it off the top of my head what they were getting. Needless to say, it gets lost in the rush of the Columbia.
You'd mentioned that there are no salmon in the Bitterroot River or the drainages. Why is that?
So it actually kind of has to do with that geography, that river geography that Lewis was talking about. Basically, the amount of waterfalls that are up there just contribute to not having them. I read a really wonderful article on why scientifically it is, but like this is my 5th grade education answer. Basically, the river geography contributed to not having them.
Did it?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Did it involve the like a giant waterfall that they couldn't go up?
So they can get above Kettle Falls, but for some reason they don't seem to have gone beyond like the lower Ponderay River.
Well, there was another waterfall.
Another waterfall
and it's
beyond that,
called
yeah.
Albany Falls.
Albany Falls, yeah.
Albini, I believe it is. And I had a bunch of fishermen tell me that that's the waterfall they couldn't get up to get into the Clark Fork Ponderay system and
Yeah,
Lake
yeah,
and
'cause-
Clark Fork system.
Yeah, because they're stopped above Kettle Falls. God, I was just up there literally like 3 days ago, and yet my mind is spacing it right now. I'm also kind of overheated up here.
There isn't an Albany Falls anymore.
Yeah, underwater. Yeah. Well, that's the thing is so much of the reason why fish can't get up to where they are now is because there's a ton of dams up there between literally Bonneville all the way up. So,
I was looking at your picture of the area where you said the Great Falls were by Great Falls, and I noticed there's like an area where they had a little bit of a dam on the right of the, or I don't know if you call those flash boards or not, in there where they used to let the water through. Yeah, on the
Oh, this
right
one?
there. It looks like
Oh,
there's
that's the
somewhat of a dam.
powerhouse.
The powerhouse, okay.
yeah, that's Powerhouse.
Do they have any fish ladders in there to get up there so the fish
Nope.
can go? Okay.
Nope. So historically, those waterfalls were always a barrier to the fish that live below it. So ecologically, there's really no reason to put a fish ladder in the Great Falls of the Missouri. So that's one case where I'm fine with the fish not being able to get through there because they historically couldn't get through it there anyways. Probably the reason why there were trout below the falls was because they got washed down. It's a lot easier to go down and over a waterfall than it is to get up and over. Yeah. Gotta get back. Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
Wasn't there a mention of bass, either smallmouth or largemouth, on the
Yes,
expedition?
lower Missouri. So they did encounter bass down kind of below Nebraska. So some of the fish that they caught in the brush drag actually were bass.
And or were those just natural, or were those ever introduced or spread even early on,
To where?
just in the United States? Have they
In the
always
United
been,
States,
to your knowledge,
To
native?
my knowledge, that far down, they were in there in some of the bigger, deeper sections of rivers. I can't tell you much beyond or towards the southeast or where they've been introduced there. I mainly focus on the Missouri River system and then a little bit into the Columbia. Fish planting of various species has been going on since the 1880s. So we've got 140 odd years of funny business going on with our river ecology. So yeah,
And do you have any history on burbot?
burbot, they are a native species.
They are, but they never mentioned that in the.
They didn't catch any burbot. None of the descriptions of fish in burbot country where they were fishing and caught anything says to me that they did. Some of the fish can be a little hard to identify at times, and we kind of have to make our best guess. But as someone who has had to be traumatized as a kid watching that thing crawl up like it's a horror movie, I don't think they caught any. They would have mentioned it.
The one that you said was the record, that
Oh,
you
yeah.
have a picture of the guy who got the record and that Lewis and Clark beat it by 8 pounds. Do you know how they measured that? Or if you
How they would have measured the
believe
weight?
them?
So they had scales along with them.
Okay.
So basically, scales at the time, you could weigh a lot of different things. Some of it is probably guessing. Some of it is probably scaled. I don't know if they used a scale to weigh that, truth be told. I hope they did.
So they weren't like measuring the length, but they were weighing.
I think they measured the length, but I don't know it off the top of my head. I should have it written down on the program notes, but Poundage is a little easier than length to kind of visualize, I think.
That, one of the last pictures that you showed of family fishing, yeah.
Oh.
Is that Bean Lake?
It's Ackley,
Oh,
so central Montana. So that's me, my sister, and my grandpa George. So.
Any more questions before we go?
Oh, yeah. Yep, that's a sturgeon.
Yeah.
So, shovelnose are okay. Pallid, not so much. There are encouraging signs on the Yellowstone River. There have been fish documented using a fish passage that they built down near Glendive. It's taking a little while for them to catch on, but once they catch on, hopefully it's just time that we've bought them to use it and be successful. Yeah, so fingers crossed, we're still waiting. That's the problem with sturgeon ecology is these are extremely long-lived fish. I mean, we have sturgeon swimming in Montana rivers that have been around since the time Fort Peck was being built, just about. So it's hard to gauge just because, again, their timeline is so stretched out that it's a waiting game to see if it takes. Funny enough, yeah, I wrote a paper on pallid sturgeon in one of my professors who was here. His class was on history of wildlife ecology in the West, and I chose pallid sturgeon. Yeah.
Give an idea of how long sturgeon live. I think it was a pallid. 15 or 30 years old or something before
Longer
they
than
could
that.
breed?
Longer than that, yeah, up into the century mark and above. So again, there are pallid sturgeon that had been swimming out there since before Fort Peck was a thing, which is just insane to think about. Those fish are starting to die off. If in fact any are still left, I don't know. They haven't been caught. Thankfully so, but that's the thing about sturgeon. Again, they live so long, and they're very sensitive, so they can get in a real hard place really quick. But it's just tough figuring out if they're doing well. So. Oh, paddlefish. Yeah, another wonderful native species. Lewis and Clark, they didn't catch any. They didn't see any. They had no idea that thing even existed. Heck, the pallid sturgeon itself, they didn't even know it was a real, separate species of sturgeon until literally within about the last century and a half. But paddlefish, again, they're a species that have been here since the time of the dinosaurs. And just with the fishing methods, they didn't have any opportunity to catch any of that. So in terms of the history of paddlefish, I'm curious what we're looking for, moreover. Yeah, no mention any of that. Yeah. As far as I can tell, yeah, they didn't have much on them. They were kind of a ghost to the deep. Probably if one washed ashore after dying, that would be a way to discover them, but I haven't found anything yet that talks about paddlefish with different people. The Kootenai, by the way, just as a side tangent, since we're talking about indigenous people, fish, and their knowledge of them, the white sturgeon was really important to the Kootenays and was really well known. There's rock art between Kalispell and Libby that depicts white sturgeon. And Montana's kind of interesting because we have a landlocked population of white sturgeon. They are Montana's largest fish, and they're somehow even more endangered than the pallid because of that. Libby Dam has really done a lot to hurt their habitat and survival. So they don't seem to have as much support for conservation and help as the Pallid does for whatever reason, but yeah, I think it's important to remember we have white sturgeon here too, so.
I had two uncles. One lived in Fort Peck and one in Medicine Lake. And Medicine Lake was visiting Fort Peck, and he found a fossilized version of a sturgeon. Unfortunately, I don't know what the family has done with it, but he was chipping away the rocks on it so that he could have a fossil of a sturgeon.
That's incredible. I'm very jealous.
All right, well, thank you again.
Yeah, again, I've got the fishing tackle up here. Please come on up, check it out. Yeah, it's fun.
And remember to come next month. We have another Lewis and Clark talk. It's our double feature month, where they're going to be talking about the individual and lesser known members of the Corps. I was going to say maybe they'll give a little spotlight, or if not, we can help